Welcome to Wines We Drink, a podcast for wine lovers and learners. I'm Charlotte Norsworthy Varnum, and together with my counterpart Keith Herndon, we'll be exploring a new wine each week. Keith is a lover of wine, and I'm a learner of wine, and we hope you'll sip along with us. Welcome everyone to our podcast, Wines We Drink. I am Charlotte Varnum, and I am joined as always by my fabulous co-host, Keith Herndon, a certified wine sommelier.
Hello, Charlotte, and welcome listeners to the second episode of our 5th season.
I'm still having a hard time grasping the fact that we've been doing this for 5 whole summers.
I know, so many great wines over all those episodes, though, right?
Right. We launched our 5th season last week with a great value Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa. It checked all the boxes for today's wine drinkers: low alcohol, low calorie, a slight effervescence, a great story to tell with a woman winemaker at the helm. So if you want to learn more about last week's selection or listen to any of our episodes from any previous seasons, please check us out on all the major podcast platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We also have a full episode guide at wineswedrink.com.
Yeah, so now let's turn our attention to today's fantastic bottle. I'm so excited for us to share this selection of a terrific California sparkling rosé with our listeners. Charlotte, you mentioned how last week's wine had a great story to tell. Well, listeners, the wine today also has a fantastic story to tell.
We're keeping up a trend of some bubbly and some great stories. I had the opportunity to serve as the editor of Keith's book that was published this year, Wine Conversations, Exploring Meaning, Mystery, and Myth. We're using the book, which is a compilation of expert interviews, as the foundation for this season's conversations. So when it came time to plan out season 5, I knew we had to highlight a wine made by Phil Long and his longevity wines. He's featured in Chapter 3, Owning a Winery.
Yeah, and it didn't take us too long to agree on which one from his extensive portfolio that we were going to feature on our show. I mean, you love rosé. Mm-hmm. I love bubbles. Mm-hmm. I think you love bubbles too.
I do.
Right. So it was sort of a no-brainer to go with his Blanc de Rosé made in the traditional champagne method.
Pink and bubbles, folks. I mean, this is a perfect bottle for a summer podcast about wine. But before we open this bottle, let's share more about Phil and his winery.
Yeah, great idea, because there are so many layers to his story. First, it's important to know that making wine for Phil is a passion project. He's self-taught. I mean, he started making wine in his garage with his wife, Deborah, and it grew into something that would just simply no longer fit in his garage, right?
I just think that's so wonderful. I love stories like that, and I also really like how he started this as a true husband and wife venture. Deborah was a big part of it until her untimely passing in 2019 from pancreatic cancer. But Phil still keeps her part of the story alive through the labels. And how cool is that?
Right. You know, in the book's interview, Phil explained how he had gifted Deborah all sorts of glass hearts and jewelry hearts over the years. You know, she just amassed quite a collection of that heart jewelry. So he's paid homage to that with this intricate label design that it's formed from grapevines and grape clusters into the shape of the heart. So please go to our Instagram account at The Wines We Drink and take a look at the bottle shot we've posted.
It's a really beautiful label, and even more so when you know the story behind it.
You know, Longevity, which is based in Livermore, California, is still a family business, and Phil's son has joined the operation and is becoming an accomplished winemaker in his own right. So it's important to note, you know, how much Phil has given back to the wine industry. He's also been so important in the industry's efforts to help diversify it. He's an African-American winemaker, and there aren't many of them, mm-hmm. and he serves as president of the African-American Vintners Association and uses that platform in a really positive way to promote opportunities for people of color. During our interview, he explained that African-American winemakers and winery owners only make up about 1% of the total.
I was really shocked to read that at the time. I mean, that is a very low number, and Phil pointed out that he could even go lower without the efforts of organizations like his to promote opportunities in the wine industry.
You know, Phil and his longevity brand have come a long way, you know, since he was making wine in his garage, and it stems from a wine business lesson he said he had to learn. So here's a brief clip from our conversation we had with him from the book.
the missing link, or the more important link, is not about what you produce, it's about what you sell. And that's that is the hardest lesson of all. To some extent, anybody can make wine, but there's so few who can sell wine. And that's a true statement.
It's clear Phil has established himself as a winemaker and winery owner who knows how to sell wine.
Mm-hmm.
He'll do about 40,000 cases this year, and that's a big step up from making wine in a garage.
I'll say it's a big step up indeed. He says you can find his wines in all 50 states and in nearly 6,000 stores, including Total Wine.
Longevity sources grapes for some of its labels from estate vineyards there in Livermore, but since 2019, its white labels, which account for most of that national distribution, are sourced from 40,000 acres in California owned by Bronco Wine, which Longevity has a partnership with. And that partnership also includes the use of some of Bronco's production facilities. So today's bottle that we're drinking is designated only as a California wine, meaning its grapes are sourced from those multiple Bronco vineyards.
And most of those grapes in today's bottle are Chardonnay, actually. It's 97.5% Chardonnay, but it gets its hue from adding 2.5% of red and white proprietary blend.
Yeah, and that touch of pink is one of Phil's trade secrets. We don't know what that proprietary blend is exactly, but it makes for a light, pale salmon color, very similar to a rosé that you would get from the Provence region in southern France.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And I think now it's time to taste some of Phil's hard work. Keith, could you pour us a couple of glasses?
Yes. Just before I do that, let me note that this wine is non-vintage, meaning that it's a blend from several recent harvests. It also follows the traditional champagne method of making sparkling wine with an infusion of sugar that allows for a second fermentation to take place in the bottle. It aged on lees, which is the yeast settlement, for at least 9 months before it was disgorged and bottled.
Ooh, yeah. There it goes.
Yes. I'm going to pour us a couple of glasses here.
I don't think there's any sound better than that pop.
Oh, I know.
You kind of hold your breath right before and then...
I definitely like the sound of some sparkling wine coming out of the bottle.
And as you're pouring, you can absolutely see that salmon color that you were talking about. It's super faint, but very unique.
Yes, and those bubbles, highlight the effervescence in this wine, and they do a great job of lifting those aromas to your nose.
The back of the label tells us to expect fresh strawberry and floral notes, and that is exactly what you get. It's like a strawberry. It's not an explosion, but it rises right up to your nose and is so fresh.
Yeah, those notes are wonderful. I'm also drawn in by the floral notes, which I'll describe as rose petals, right? It's like sticking your nose into that Valentine's Day bouquet of roses.
Oh, this would be a great Valentine's sip for sure. I mean, with that pink color, this is an incredibly romantic bottle of wine out there. So there's a tip for all of you out there listening that need to impress that significant other. Put this bottle on your list.
I'll make sure your husband, James...
Yeah.
connects the dots when he listens to this episode.
Wink, honey.
James, buy a few bottles of this for Charlotte now. Right? So let's go in for that first sip. Okay?
Great, here we go. That is just wonderful. I mean, wow, it's so juicy. You not only get the strawberry aromas, but that carries through on the palate. You get the strawberry flavor. In the very first sip, I'm going to go back in for another. I like the bubbles with this rosé. It makes it so fun to drink.
Well, bubbles are always fun to drink, right? I drank this wine several weeks ago when we featured it at a tasting at the Tapped Athens Wine Tasting Market. Returning to it today reminds me of how much I like the bright citrus notes that come through. Yeah, yes, that red fruit that we talked about is there, but it finishes crisp with lemon and vibrant acid. There's a touch of sweetness to the end, but the acid, balances it out quite nicely.
Well said, and very true. And in the book, You also featured an interview with Tanya Pitts, a reviewer and writer at large with Wine Enthusiast magazine, and that led to an unplanned intersection here with the book and today's wine selection. So Tanya reviewed this wine for the magazine and gave it a great score of 93 points. Keith, could you read off her tasting notes on this wine for everyone?
Yes. Here are Tanya's words describing today's wine. Quote, "This wine is fresh with aromas of strawberry, raspberry, citrus blossom, white peach, spice, and acacia honey on the nose. Flavors on the palate are strawberry, raspberry cream, cranberry, pomegranate, almond slivers, and orange spice. The wine has bright acidity, a medium mousse mid-palate, and a dry, mouth-watering finish." End quote.
There's no better way to say that. That sums it up so nicely and so poetically. It certainly echoes how we feel about this wine. And of course, how we feel about the story behind it, too. I think it was very beautifully said and done. And it's an excellent choice for our second episode in this milestone season 5.
Without a doubt, a Wine Enthusiast 93-point bottle with an average price of around $20 a bottle means you have an excellent wine for your next party, especially when it comes in at only 11% alcohol by volume. And that could be a Valentine's Day party, too.
Right. We said exactly. Your guests are going to love it. Your significant other's going to love it. James, I will love it if you're listening. So what should our listeners think about when pairing this wine with food?
Well, the bright acidity of this wine works really well with ceviche, right? And I also like it with some Asian dishes. One suggestion is to pair it with pad thai.
Oh, yeah.
But for the perfect pairing, I'm going to defer to our friend Tanya Pitts again, who in her review, she suggested pairing this with roasted orange chicken. That's next on my kitchen list.
Oh, man. On mine, too. That does sound wonderful. And you know me, though. I do love my wine and cheese pairings, too. So I'm going to also throw out there pairing this wine with a nice Gouda cheese.
Oh, gosh, you're spot on with that cheese pairing. The acid is going to cut through the semi-hard texture, and the red fruit notes will blend nicely with Gouda's sweet and nutty flavor. Right?
And now we are going to indulge in a bit of that Gouda cheese and more of this pink bubbly, and we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be in the finished portion of our show, and today's topic is wine ratings.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to delving into that when you return, but I really want some of this Gouda and bubbly.
Let's take a moment and try some. Welcome back, everyone. You found us today for our second episode in the 5th season of what we like to call our summer fun project. We're now in the portion of the show that we call the finish.
Yes, you caught me coming back with a few bites still to
with
go
some
here.
Extra Gouda in our mouth. That was really good.
Well, as part of today's finish, we want to provide some context about wine ratings.
Even if you're not a subscriber or an avid reader of such publications as Wine Enthusiast, Wine Spectator, Wine Advocate, you're likely to encounter wine ratings posted on the shelves at your favorite wine retailer. I know I see them all the time. And if you're like me, those ratings often kind of sway my purchasing decisions.
Yeah, perhaps I was a little more jaded about these ratings before I interviewed Tanya Pitts for the book. We introduced her earlier in the show with her review of today's wine. As a reminder, she's a reviewer and writer at large for Wine Enthusiast. She's also an award-winning sommelier at San Francisco's One Market restaurant. But here's a brief clip from our interview on what she had to say about her wine ratings.
That they are honest, true, and authentic. And we've taken the time to taste through these wines, to weed through everything, so that it's not a sea of labels. When you go into your local grocery store or wine shop, or if you go online to purchase wine, we've done the work for you to make it easier for you.
You know, Keith, when I hear her words, I really understand the sincerity there.
Yes, I agree. And I think before this interview, I was one of those wine people who viewed wine ratings as mostly marketing gimmicks, but I've come around to understanding how complicated the wine market is for many consumers, and having these ratings are useful. if for nothing else, pointing someone in the right direction.
Right. I mean, you're echoing the sentiments from a blog post about ratings from a California winery. It reads, quote, "In a market saturated with an endless array of varietals, vintages, and appellations, ratings offer a compass pointing towards wines that have been deemed exceptional in quality, character, and craftsmanship."
I think it's clear that most of the professional raters, along with the magazines and other organizations who publish ratings, do so with a lot of integrity. And I've probably been a little hypocritical about ratings. You know, I've been using ratings as part of this podcast for years as a way to highlight the quality of the wines that we featured. You know, after all, we did that today.
Right. And of course, we're both still journalists at heart, though. So what does some healthy skepticism call for you to point out?
Well, we have to acknowledge that while raters are professionals, the results are still very subjective, and we can see that when ratings vary for the same bottle of wine. You know, also there are many more wine labels in the market than there are raters available, and so there's some great wines out there that don't have a rating. You know, to a large extent, wineries have to submit their wines for review, and some just don't take the initiative or have the resources to play in the game.
Yeah, that's a great point and some good context, I think, too. And that's where a crowdsourced rating service like the Vivino app can really help fill in those gaps, don't you think?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we've used the Vivino app since the outset of this podcast to talk about the wines we featured. And there's professional research to back up that the Vivino ratings correlate nicely with those of the professional critics, you know, which to me indicates that there's a benefit to crowdsourced ratings. But today's bottle was an anomaly.
What do you mean?
Well, today's bottle had a professional rating from Wine Enthusiast, but there aren't enough consumer ratings on Vivino for a definitive score. You know, that's the opposite of what we usually encounter.
That's so true. And I think that it's a good reminder as well that you can take all of this with a grain of salt. And if you like it, then you like it, right? But Keith, before we go today, let's give another shout out to Tanya Pitts. We talked about Phil Long's role as president of the African American Vintners Association, and Tanya is really also making a big contribution in the industry. As a Black woman, she's become an important mentor and role model for many women in the industry, especially women of color. Her awards and accolades are simply too long to read here, but please do check her out and check out her interview in Keith's book.
Charlotte, that's a great way to segue into a shameless plug.
True.
You can find Wine Conversations Exploring Meaning, Mystery, and Myth on Amazon, or you can order it through our local distributor, Neighborhood Books. The links are on our website at wineswedrink.com.
And so it's now time to bring today's finish to a close. Keith, what can we share with everyone about next week's episode?
Charlotte, next week we're featuring a wine from a Napa grape growing legend. To all of our listeners out there, Chef Charlotte makes her debut with the perfect pairing for next week's selection.
Wow, the pressure's on. The perfect pairing, you say. Whew. Okay, well, until next week, everyone. We'll see.
I know Chef Charlotte will deliver. Until next week, cheers.
Thanks for listening to Wines We Drink. Listen to our other episodes anywhere you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on Instagram at The Wines We Drink, and check out our episode guides at wineswedrink.com. Cheers.